This year alone, I've made more than $100,000 from restaurant photography work. And in my 13-year career, I've worked with thousands of restaurants. So today I'm sharing some of my best tips so that you can also take amazing restaurant food photos and also increase your restaurant food photography revenue. Let's go. So the first tip I have for you has to do with a restaurant's branding. Now, you as a photographer have to make sure that you incorporate the restaurant's branding colors, whether it's through their menu, if it's an actual printed menu, their interiors, or any other specialist branding they may have on disposable items, such as coasters or napkins, or even cutlery. Now, this is really important because if they're using these images on social media or even on their website, as soon as someone sees their image on their feed, that person needs to recognize that this is from a particular restaurant and not just a stock image. So there needs to be some sort of association between the food that you're photographing and the restaurant you're actually photographing for. Now, this is what's really going to help you stand out amongst other restaurant food photographers whose work can often look like stock images. Other food photographers often take restaurant dishes and photograph them on generic backgrounds. And whilst these images look fantastic, there's absolutely no correlation between the image that they've taken and the actual restaurant. It's like they don't belong together. That image could easily belong in a cookbook or on a blog or in a magazine. So you always want to ensure, where possible, use the branding, the crockery, the cutlery that's already available at the restaurant. So here's an example of a very generic looking image that I took for a local Asian restaurant. And honestly, looking at this image, you'd have no clue what the name of this restaurant is, or where it is, or even what hotel it belongs to. Or even if it actually even belongs to a restaurant, it could even be a cookbook. Now, compare that image to this image I took of the exact same food, the same lighting, same props, same composition. But now you can see I've actually added in the restaurant menu. And just this one change has taken the image from being boring and generic without any soul to suddenly being very authentic to Shang Palace. So always be on the lookout of how you can add the restaurant's branding to the imagery that you're taking in order to make it instantly recognizable that it belongs to that restaurant. Now, speaking of branding, props aren't the only way to add a restaurant stamp to the imagery. Another great way to bring the restaurant's branding and their ambiance into your images is by using parts of the interior in your images, whether it's a chair or an interesting tile that you see, or even a painting. So as an example, you can see this image of the dessert that I shot for a local French restaurant. And rather than shooting it on the table, I thought that their chairs would form the perfect backdrop for this dessert. Another example is this image here, and you can see that the interiors of the restaurant have been used as a backdrop. So if somebody sees this image on social media, they'll immediately recognize what restaurant it belongs to. So always be thinking about how you can add a hint of the interiors to not only make the image instantly recognizable to that restaurant or brand, but also to add a bit of original interest and ambiance to your images. Okay, so the next tip I have for you has to do with lighting. Now, if you're using natural light at a restaurant, I highly recommend you download the Sunseeker app or any other similar app which will tell you exactly where the sun is in relation to the restaurant, and also the direction that the sun will move in throughout the day. This will help you plan your shoot depending on where the light will be best in the restaurant and the mood you want to create. So as an example, if you want hard light in your images, this app will tell you exactly where in the restaurant you're going to get that direct hard light and what time as well. Now, if you're looking for soft northern light for diffuse lighting throughout the day, you know, that kind of lighting that remains consistent, then the app will be able to provide that information. So if you're using natural light, you also want to make sure you know exactly what time the sun is setting in order to ensure that your shot list can be completed by that time. Now, whilst we're on the subject of lighting, another top tip I have for you is to block out any overhead lighting. Whether you're using artificial lights or natural light, any bright overhead lighting such as spotlights will add a color cast to your images or cause unnecessary reflections on plates that aren't matte. Let me show you an example. So here I'm actually using artificial lighting to take menu shots. And if you pay really close attention, you'll notice that there's tiny light reflections on the plate from the spotlights. Now, this was a result of the overhead lights in the restaurant. Now, as soon as I block these, you can see that the difference is super subtle, but you now don't have glowing reflection. Now, it's a really small difference, but it's really these small differences that get you rehired again and again by the same clients. Okay, let's move on to the next tip. Now, one of the first things I do when I reach a restaurant that I'm shooting at is actually go on a treasure hunt. That's right. I love being nosy, and I head straight into the kitchen and pick out any crockery, cutlery, or interesting pieces of ceramics that I can use as potential props in the background of my images. So as an example, in this photo over here, this Indian restaurant had a beautiful array of golden trays, as well as these golden salt and pepper pots that went beautifully with their menu shots. Or take this example here where I was shooting a local dim sum restaurant. They had these handmade wooden trays that were a perfect accent for the image. And again, it also ties in with that branding concept that we spoke about earlier. So the next couple of tips I have for you involve the chef at the restaurant. Now, it's always a good idea to form a rapport with the chef before a shoot starts. At the end of the day, whether you have a food stylist on board or not, it's actually the chef that will be doing the initial preparation of the food as well as the initial styling and plating. So you really want to be aligned when it comes to several things. Now, before I get into those tips that involve a chef and how a chef can really help you to improve your restaurant photography, I want to tell you all about my absolutely free guide, which has even more tips on improving your food photography in general and actually making money from it. Now, this guide is packed with insider tips on composition, lighting, editing, and monetization. So make sure you click the link in the description box and download it while it's still available. Okay, let's get back to restaurant photography now. Now, the first thing you want to discuss with the chef prior to plating or styling a single dish is how often to bring out the food or the dishes. Now, at this stage, you should already have a shot list as well as some time frame of how long you think it's going to take you. And a chef should be aware of this. So what I like to do is tell the chef that I'm going to notify him, say maybe 5 minutes before I'm ready for the next dish. I usually find that chefs require between 5 and 15 minutes to prep a dish. So when I'm 5 minutes away from completing the dish that's actually in front of me, I usually then send a message back to the chef or peek into the kitchen and let the chef know that they can start prepping for the next dish. So this type of constant communication back and forth is super important on a restaurant shoot. Some dishes might take you a little bit longer, some dishes will just take a few minutes. So you need to be constantly communicating with each other to ensure the success of the shoot. Now, the second tip I have for you when it comes to working with a chef at a restaurant is to ensure that any dishes that have sauces or anything wet or anything that melts should come separately from the dish. So as an example, if you're shooting any salads, make sure the dressing comes separately from the salad. And really the reason for this is that if the salad actually came already dressed, then it usually just takes minutes before that salad is completely gone and collapsed, and you don't really have much time to photograph. You're not going to get time to experiment with your compositions or your angles. So I usually ask for the dressing to be kept separate, and then once I'm happy with my final shot, I'll add the dressing as a final touch. The same will go for any desserts I'm shooting. If there's any sauces going on top, I'll usually ask for that to be put on separately at the end. Now, if you look at this example here, this dessert was brought in without any ice cream. And we played around with the composition, with the lighting, with the focus. And then once that shot had been approved and we nailed it, the chef then topped the dessert with the ice cream. And then we took the final shot without any stress, and this just ensured that the ice cream wasn't melting on set and I wasn't stressing out and the chef didn't have to replate. Now, another tip I have for you when working with a chef is to speak to the chef beforehand about angles. Now, when it comes to food plating, a chef is normally plating for a customer, which is very different from plating food for photography. When you're plating for a customer, the chef is going to plate for like a straight on angle, the way a customer will look at the food when they're seated. Whereas when you're photographing as a photographer, you might be using a completely different angle. So you want to make sure that the food is shown at its best angle, that all the different ingredients are showing, that the orders of the colors are working well together. So you really want to speak with the chef about how he'll be plating each dish and what angle is going to work best for each particular dish. Now, sometimes the chef is happy to make any minor changes to the plating in order to accommodate this. Remember, it's not about changing the way the chef plates the dish completely and making it drastically different, but sometimes just a few subtle changes can really help to highlight what makes that dish special or any special ingredients that are being used. Okay, my next tip has to do with props. Now, anyone who's done restaurant photography knows that oftentimes, in fact, probably most of the time, restaurants have crockery that is super shiny. So a little hack I have for you here is to carry some dulling spray whenever you're doing restaurant photography to combat this. Now, once you have your final shot, all you want to do is spray the cutlery or the crockery from a distance with some dulling spray. And this really works to treat and minimizing unwanted reflection. So here's an example of an image without dulling spray on the cutlery and then quick spray later. You can see how much better the final image looks without the unnecessary reflections. And a pro tip over here, you can even use this dulling spray on shiny ceramics to get reflections from windows or artificial lights. You just need to make sure that if you spray this on any plates, you notify the kitchen so they're not actually eating out of this plate. Now, speaking of reflections and lighting in general, I really want you to check out this video I made all about dark, moody photography. Recently, so many restaurants have been asking me for this type of photography, and if you enjoy taking dark, moody photos in general, you will love the tips that are in this video. Have a great rest of the week, and we will meet again next week when a new video drops.